Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I'm speaking with Francis Foster. Francis is a comedian and a co-host of the Trigonometry podcast, which you should all check out. Hey Francis, thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I've been watching your stuff. I've been watching the Trigonometry podcast, and you guys are talking about a lot of the same stuff I'm really concerned about. But I wanted to speak to you about comedy because you're a comedian, and I'm seeing this stuff happen, and I'm looking at what's going on in schools and universities, and they're teaching people to find offense in everything. So, like, as a comedian, comedy is offense. Like, I'll take Hitchens and I'm gonna mangle a Hitchens quote, and he's like, it's not comedy unless it's at someone's expense. And comedy is basically finding offense and offending people, or taking hot button topics. So, if you've got a culture that's trained to find offense in everything, how is comedy supposed to survive?
Well, it's a very, very good question. And I think this is a problem. It's that rapidly the Overton window of what you can and can't joke about on stage is narrowing. And I've seen it. So I started in comedy in 2009. And what you could discuss in comedy then and what you can discuss now, there really is no comparison. And people will say, oh, you can joke about anything and you can go on stage and you can joke about anything and it should be fine. Well, yeah, I can go on stage and joke about anything as a professional comedian. And when the comedy clubs were open, it meant that if I went on stage and I joked about a particular subject, if the audience didn't go with it, if it split the crowd, if it meant the promoter got complaints, then I would be far less likely to be rebooked. That's how it is. And what you've seen is, I think most people realize and are actually very sensible, very mature, and realize the purpose of comedy is to be, to joke, is to deal with subjects that are, contentious, that in particular, that we may not feel comfortable talking about. I think if you look at the greatest comedians, the comedians who we all respect, admire, look up to, whether it's, Chappelle, Rock, Patrice O'Neill, your Bill Burrs, your Richard Pryors, a large part of why we enjoy, or certainly why I enjoy their comedy so much, is going, I can't believe they've just said that. Oh my Lord. I always wish I could say that, but I could never do that. I can't believe that they've done that. It's that thrill, that transgressive thrill of watching a comedian or a performer say the things that you think, but you can never even probably admit to yourself. And I think with what is happening in comedy of saying, this is punching down. You can't make this joke. You can't make that joke. You can't say this. What you're doing is you're destroying an art form. You really are. And look, I was, before the pandemic hit, I was in the clubs in London and I was gigging 6 nights a week, playing to crowds of hundreds of people every night, right? And these clubs are the most reputable clubs in the UK. And I remember, and I got on very well with the people running the club, because not only did I used to do sets there, but I also used to host, because it meant that I would be working every night of the week, and it meant that I had a steady income coming in, right? So I used to host a lot, and I used to quite enjoy hosting clubs as well, because it's good fun. And I remember talking to promoters and saying to them, what's it like now with complaints? And every single one of them told me that complaints were up year upon year. And this isn't, the Chuckle Hut in some, part of the country playing to 12 people, This is reputable mainstream comedy club playing to hundreds of people every night.
Okay, like the offense thing. I remember Michael Richards. I don't know if you remember that, but the guy who played Kramer on Seinfeld, I think it was in the 90s or something. He went on stage and he just started yelling the N-word. And he just started, okay, that's offensive. That's wrong. That wasn't funny. But Jimmy Carr making that joke about mosquito nets in South Africa, saying, you need to protect the mosquitoes from AIDS. Now that's offensive. It's whatever, but it's bringing up a topic and it's being funny. It's not just standing up on stage and telling your audience to fuck off.
No.
So where, okay, I look at someone like Hannah Gadsby, and all I know about her is that one little thing that went around a couple of years ago. I'm like,
What one little thing about her?
she talked about how there's no such thing as good men and whatever. It was from
Okay, right, got you.
okay.
Yeah,
Now, is that what's comedy is becoming? Because I mean, okay, again, comedy. Sorry, ramble here for a second, but like court jesters, they were there to tell truth to power. They were going to make fun of the king. I mean, obviously, their life was a little precarious every now and then, but isn't that what comedy is supposed to do? Is to highlight the absurd and the awful in society in such a way that, like my go-to is always making a joke. Like, it's all, 9/11. I mean, people are going to think I'm horrific, but literally 10 minutes after watching the planes crash, and I mean, I was totally shocked, and I was outside with some friends at work having a smoke, and I said, "Oh, I guess American Airlines is going to hire some flight attendants." Now, now that's awful, and it's, but that's how I deal with things. And so, like, are we cutting off an outlet for people?
I think so when we talk about the purpose of comedy, whilst I agree with you, that to me that is the elevated form of comedy. That is comedy at its best, talking truth to power, etc., etc. Hicks, Chappelle, Rock, all these people. The people who we venerate, who I particularly idolize, who made me want to become a comedian. Right.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is the purpose of comedy is to make people laugh. Now, how you do that and the way you do that and what you joke about, that's up to you. But that is the purpose of comedy broadly. So, for instance, there's a lot of people who don't particularly like Hannah Gadsby. I'm of the opinion with Hannah, I haven't really seen her work. It's not for me. I kind of already know that. But you know what? She's got an audience. That's brilliant. That's great that she goes around the world, that she can come to the UK, sell out the Royal Albert Hall, 5,500 people want to come and see her show. That's brilliant. If you want to do that, good for you, right? Where I have a problem with it is when people come along and try and stop others from joking about, from doing their comedy. That's where the problem comes in, because it is illiberal, and what it is as well is having a particular worldview that you then bully others into having and shame others into having. Because you say it is wrong to make fun of or to talk about X, Y, Z topics. Therefore, I believe it. Therefore, you should too. And if you don't agree with me, and if you don't go along with the way that I think, I will destroy you. So I'll give you an example of it. So we do, at Trigonometry, we've done very well. It's been a real pleasure, and it's amazing to connect with people like you in Montreal, people all around the world. I've loved it. We got signed to a big management company, which, we're very happy about, and all the rest of it. And immediately there was a small group of comedians who, they're not very bright, bless them, in public were talking on Facebook, on a Facebook thread, about getting us cancelled from our management company. They were openly talking about it. I mean, the week before they were talking about how cancel culture doesn't exist. So you can see, they're not the sharpest knives in the kitchen, as it were.
Yeah. Okay. One thing about the Hannah Gadsby, like, okay, she has a career. I didn't mean to say that to stop her from being a comedian or anything. Like, more power to you. Do whatever you want. Make your money.
Yeah.
No problem. And if someone likes it, people like Britney Spears. I can't stand her. I'm not going to stop. Do whatever you want, right? Like, but the comedy thing, like only can say what I want to say. You can only do what I want to do. But like you mentioned, they're not the brightest tools in the shed, or sharpest tools in the shed. But like, the best comedians I've always found were the ones that were the most intelligent. Like George Carlin was incredibly intelligent in the way he could play with words. So if you're getting people kind of dumbed down and not willing to talk about anything, like, won't that also ruin the art form, or like completely change it? It's not going to be, you're just going to stand up on stage and tell a narrative that might make people cry instead of laugh. Like, I don't understand that. Like, I don't know. I don't get where that that impetus is coming from.
I mean, look, the thing that is the way that comedy has gone in that sense is because partly it's to do with the fact that in the UK, comedy is not respected as an art form, right? So when you want to get noticed as a comedian, you go and what you do is this bastard mixture of comedy and theatre, where you go to the Edinburgh Festival. That's how you get noticed as a UK comedian. That's where Hannah went to get noticed. And you do this mixture of, comedy and tragedy, and you talk about how sad your life is. Everybody cries at the 40-minute mark, and then it then gets, reviewed by people like The Guardian and, all the middle-class reviewers. They then give it their seal of approval, and then it gets picked up. And that's how that works, right? So that's where that's where Hannah made her name, really, was at the Edinburgh Festival, right? And that's a particular style of comedy. And it's not my thing, but, people tend to like it and whatever else. But going back to what we were talking about, the problem is when you say to people that some things are not acceptable to be discussed. Some things you simply can't joke about. And what I have noticed personally, and this is anecdotal, but I think a lot of comedians will share this, is that there is a growing sensitivity in audiences. The more white an audience is, the more liberal an audience is, white and liberal particularly. White and working class can give a fuck. But white and liberal, the more sensitive they are, the more that they will feel uncomfortable, the more about certain jokes being made, and the more restrictive and the narrower the Overton window is for these subjects to be discussed is. And what I've noticed over the years is that is getting narrower and narrower and narrower. So jokes that you used to be able to make 1, 2, 3 years ago, now you can't make. And it's not even that you have audience members being uncomfortable about you making certain jokes. It's like I said before, is that people will seek to ruin and to destroy your career. So another example, there's comedians who've got quite a big podcast, and they made a joke about disabled people, which actually wasn't offensive. It was talking about, essentially how disabled like a person would be before you wouldn't consider them to be, to date them. That was a joke. Now, for context, my mother's disabled. My mother has chronic osteoarthritis. My father's a full-time carer, right? Yeah. And I listened to that joke. I found nothing offensive in it in the slightest. But then what happened is a mob came down on those comedians, demanding that they retract the joke, demanding that they apologized. A charity got involved. Their agent was contacted. And lo and behold, they had to come out and apologize, because if they didn't, their career would be ruined as a result.
We had something similar in Quebec a few years back. I think it was, the comedian's name was Mike Ward. He made a joke about a disabled kid, and he got fined $50,000.
Yeah.
I mean, that's ridiculous. But getting back to the audience thing there, where they're looking to be offended. Now, I look at that as, I don't know if it's so much that they're uncomfortable with the joke. I think what it is, that this is just, my dime store psychology here. It's that they've been taught that this stuff is offensive. They go to they go to a club, someone says something, they laugh at, or internally they laugh at it, but they're uncomfortable at themselves because they find it funny. So it's like they're rooting out the sin in themselves. And it's, I think it's, I don't know, like I said, it's dime store psychology here, but they found it funny, but to laugh at it would, their date or their friends or whatever will find them awful, so they can't laugh at it. So they get all uncomfortable, and then they lash out at the comedian because you made me feel this way. Like, you didn't make me laugh. You made me feel uncomfortable. Like, again, I'm going back to schools and stuff. And I just wondered, like, when you're teaching this and I know it's worse in the US than it is in the UK, but everything's racist. Going for a hike is racist. You can't use the term master bedroom because that denotes slavery. Like, it's all awful. Yeah, like, I don't know if it's that or if it's I'm still like, I got into all of this because I came back from overseas. Like, I'd worked for close to 13 years overseas, and I come back and I'd criticize Islam, and someone called me a white supremacist. And I'm like, where the hell's that coming from? Like, A, I'm brown, and B, like, I come from a Muslim background. I just come back from Afghanistan. I think I can say a few things about Islam, but and I just wanted to find out where that thing came from, and I just went down this huge rabbit hole of wokeness. And I find it like that. Like they're taught that these things aren't funny, or you can't say these things, or you can't do that. So when, they go to see you and you make a joke that makes them feel uncomfortable, instead of looking back at why they're uncomfortable, they're like lashing directly out at you. That's the kind of sense I get from the audience perspective.
I think it's different to different people. What I would say is, let's be honest, we all have subjects or topics that for whatever reason we don't find funny because it affects us directly, whatever it may be. And I don't know what it may be. To some, it's sexual assault, rape, pedophilia, whatever it may be, because of our lived experience, as we, as is the common term that we now use. The problem is not that. The problem is that we believe that we are so important, we're so narcissistic as a generation, that just because we find it offensive, that we think that it's so offensive, therefore it can't be discussed. Nobody else can listen to it. Nobody else can enjoy this joke because I find it offensive. And to me, that's a problem. It's a problem of narcissism. It's thinking that our worldview, our opinions are so important that the one person, the individual, can dictate to the majority what we can and cannot enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, I take that as like Mill's idea of, if all of humanity minus one was of one opinion, you have to give that one the voice, right? And I mean, Mill goes on to talk about you can have the tyranny of the minority and all that kind of stuff as well, but it's gotten to that, like, okay, so it's again, I think it's a miseducation where they're taking that. It's like, okay, well, my voice can't be silenced, so I must be heard. Again, it was, the 90s, and with the fundamentalist Christians, it's like, change the channel. Like, if I don't find you funny, I'm not going to buy a ticket to your comedy show, and I'm not going to go. Like, I mean, in some sense, some guy who doesn't find you funny and is going to pay money to go to your show, he's putting money in your pocket, but then he's going there to specifically look for offense. And that's like, why are you putting your, like I said, I don't like Britney Spears. I'm not going to pay money to go see her sing. Okay, she doesn't sing anymore, but like, name any artist, like an artist I don't like. I'm not going to spend money to a concert to go see that artist or go see a comedian that I don't like. I mean, there's a masochism there as well. Like, you're going to see this, to watch it, to be pissed off, to find offense, like to make yourself all worked up. Like, I don't know. I just find, there is a narcissism and all that, but it's just, why do you want to put yourself through that? Like, I don't understand why people would do that. Like,
I think that the reason that people do that is because it makes you feel powerful. It makes you feel strong. The fact that you can stand up and say, I do not like this, I want this shut down, I want this cancelled, makes people feel powerful. It gives them a power in a life where let's be honest, the majority of us feel powerless. We're all in this system, things, even more so now with COVID, our movement is being restricted. We can't go abroad, we can't go on holiday, we can't enter a place without wearing a mask. It's a very difficult time, particularly now. But if you say that what somebody has done is unacceptable and you stop them from doing it, wow, what a rush. What a thrill. You're able to do that? I mean, how many people can say that they've done that? And in people's minds, you can frame that as, that you're somehow this great fighter of freedom, standing up for the oppressed. I'm standing up for the guy who can't stand up for themselves.
Yeah, it was... Okay, when you mentioned that, it brought to mind, I don't know if you saw it. It was at Macy's. They had a set of plates. They were really a stupid joke, but on the outside it said mom jeans. In the middle, it had a ring that said regular jeans, and then the third concentric circle at the very center said skinny jeans. So some blue check mark on Twitter got upset and said this is fat shaming and fat phobic. And got it pulled from Macy's. Now, she probably felt great about herself, but okay, if you hadn't brought those plates to people's attentions, I don't think a lot of people would have bought them at Macy's, because they're probably expensive at Macy's, and they're, like I said, they didn't look good and it wasn't that funny. And just out of the market, Macy's would have taken that off the shelves. But after she did that, there were places that were buying the overstock from Macy's so they could sell them online, and they were making money off of it because she made such a huge deal out of it. It's just like, in some ways, I mean, okay, canceling people, getting them fired, you're not being able to get a gig, that's, that's horrible. But in some other ways, it's, I think people call it the Streisand effect or whatever. You're going to get more of it, more people to see it. So like, I think it's counterproductive and everything. I just want to tilt for a second here. Like, okay, I'm a free speech advocate. That's, I believe that unless I'm calling for violence or, death or something like that, or whatever you say should go. You don't have to listen to me. You don't have to agree with me. Come up with an argument. It's all good. But the country of Milton and Mill, to stifle speech and to hold back what can be said. I mean, the comedic tradition in the UK, like if you read some of the Shakespeare stuff, it is funny, and it's and the guy was offensive. Like he had like rape jokes in there, he had all kinds of stuff. I mean, like do you see a tradition going? Like do you see like I obviously things change, norms change, but it's like, to me that was almost core to the to the UK after the 1700s, was like the free speech and making fun of everything. Like I don't know, like do you like
look? There've always been laws, to restrict. There've always been people who've been wanting to restrict speech for whatever reason, right? If you just take America briefly. So let's go back to Lenny Bruce. Lenny Bruce was prosecuted time and time again under obscenity laws.
Yeah.
Look at Hicks. Hicks's last ever performance, I think it was on Letterman, got pulled because it was deemed to be an quote unquote offensive. He was attacked time and time again from the Christian right. I think it was in the 1960s. I can't remember the name of the law. It escapes me now in the UK, where certain books, plays, etc., were banned under obscenity laws. So there's always been this fight. There've always been this constant pushback of people wanting to censor, to stop certain things from being said, from being used. I was watching, I don't know if you've seen it, the film Straight Outta Compton about the band NWA. And they were being shut down, because they were saying, for their song Fuck the Police. So this has always been happening. But what happens is it manifests itself in a different form. In the 90s, for people like Bill Hicks, it was the Christian right. In the 50s, it was the government. Now, what you've got is this part of the left who are very, 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 aggressive, censorious, want to bully, want to shame, want to destroy. But it's just a different manifestation of the same type of people. That's all it is. And it's our job, as it's your job and it's my job. And it's everybody's job who disagrees with this to stand up and say that they disagree with it. And accept that you are going to get flack your way. And you're going to get criticized. And people, like people have called me a racist and, all these things. And you've got to accept that. But as well, what we shouldn't deny is the fact that the rewards have never been greater either. Because when people feel that their freedom of speech is being limited, that they are being bullied, that they are being pushed around, that if you actually stand up and say, look, I disagree with what you are saying, I disagree with this for A, B, C, D, E, F reasons, it's going to be far easier for you to find an audience. It's going to be far easier for you to attract people, because the mainstream culture of comedians, political commentators, writers are not talking about these things because they're scared. So in a way, it is the worst of times. I agree with you. In other ways, it is the best of times. Plus, at the moment, YouTube are ever more, having their hands around the throats of free speech and dictating what we can and can't talk about. But you can still find an audience for yourself online. You can still connect to that group of people. So best of times, worst of times, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, now I'm going to name one person, and it's like, I already talked about Hannah Gadsby, but like Sarah Silverman got in trouble in the 90s on Bill Maher's first show, Politically Incorrect, because she made a joke about Chinese people and she used the word chink.
Right. Yeah.
And recently she came out again, saying, well, this is ridiculous. It's going to ruin comedy. But, and I'm not trying to pick on her because I find her quite funny. Like I find her stand up. Yeah. But
She's
there was
a great joke writer.
There was that period for a few years where you had comedians who were saying, well, and like big name comedians who had gotten big off being offensive, right? Like, or their comedy was offensive, whatever. Like, but they were saying, oh, you can't say this. How can you say that? Oh, you have to watch it. Like, it's one thing to see it from the audience, but when you have actual comedians who made their bread and butter off of being offensive. And I'm not saying Sarah Silverman was specifically going out to be offensive, but some of her jokes you could say were offensive. And like I said, I found her very funny. But where do you, like, when you see that, do you just think, okay, these people are cowards, or, like how do you deal with that? Like when it's coming from comedians who made their bread and butter off of this stuff, and then they now are opposed to it, and they're trying to stop young comedians from coming up.
Well, in Sarah's defense, I think she's railed back on those views a little bit.
Yeah.
I think, and full credit to her for that. And Bill Maher has always been very outspoken about this type of thing. I actually quite like Bill Maher. I find him very nuanced. Don't always agree with everything he says, but there's a thought and a logic behind it. I think at the very start of this, it was far easier to get sucked in because we hadn't reached the point we've reached now. People hadn't realized where this was all going. So I'll use an example. We started the show in 2018, right? April 2018. In the first few months, our biggest guest, and a friend of the show and a friend of mine, is a guy called Brendan O'Neill. I don't know if you've heard of Brendan.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, okay. So for those of you who listen to the podcast who don't know him, Brendan is a journalist, he's a political commentator, and he's a free speech absolutist. And we were talking with him in let's say June or July 2018. And he went, there is a problem with freedom of speech in this country. And Konstantin and I, my co-host, looked at each other and went, what? Like, give me an example. And he used the example of this comedian not being able to do Holocaust-denying material, comedy jokes, right? On his song. And I remember making the joke and we all laughed. I'm like, I'm going to be honest with you, Brendan. I'm struggling to give a fuck about her, right? Yeah. Why do I care that, some crank somewhere isn't able to, to do these jokes? But actually, when I look back at it now, that was a position of ignorance. Because the reality is, if you don't stand up for those people who say ridiculous and offensive things and you support them getting cancelled, well, you're supporting the narrowing of the Overton window. And guess what? It's a process. And once it starts with someone like her, it's going to carry on until you find yourself getting pushed out as well. Yeah. It's very, very, very difficult to defend people saying obnoxious, awful, racist, blah, blah, blah things. But the reality is, you shouldn't defend their opinions, but you must always defend their right to say it. They have the right to say it. Now, they should be criticized and they can be mocked and whatever else. But you cannot and should not ever support the right to have them deplatformed, cancelled, removed. Because it's a process. It will start with her and it will carry on. And the real clue is in the name, progressive. What does that mean? It's progress. It's moving forward. Progress is removing her. Then they're going to come after somebody who's on the who's right wing, who says, who's very hard line on immigration. Oh, well, they're racist and blah blah. Let's get rid of them. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Until we are where we are.
Okay, a couple of things on that, like, I will defend anyone's right to speak. Okay, like I said, I used to speak out about Islam. I still do a little bit. I'm more speaking about this stuff. But someone like Linda Sarsour, I find Linda Sarsour I don't know if you know who she is.
No, I don't know who she is.
She's in the U.S. She works with organizations like CARE. She was a sponsor for Bernie, but she's hardline Muslim, and she's like, oh, Sharia just means you get rid of your credit card debt. There's no interest. Like, just complete bullshit artist. I signed a petition because they were trying to stop her from coming to Canada to speak at university. And so, no, she has the right to speak. Yeah. Now, are people confusing you defending the right of someone to speak with you agreeing with their views? Because, I mean, like I said, I despise Linda Sarsour. I think she's a horrible person. I don't agree with just about anything she says. But I want her to go out there and speak. I want people to see what she's saying because, whatever, it's overused, but sunlight is the best disinfectant. When you can hear her lie about stuff, then maybe less people will take her seriously. Like that's always been my position on this kind of stuff. Like, let the Nick Griffiths of the world speak, let people find out how horrible they are. Yeah. And that's it. You're done. But again, do you get that pushback? Like, oh, how dare you support that person? You must support their views. Like what's going on with Dawkins right now. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. And, you can support Dawkins. I agree with what he said, but I mean, I agree with his premise there, but if you can support Dawkins, you don't have to agree with him. But like right away, it's like, if you support that person, you agree with everything they've said and everything they've ever said. And that's like, again, it's ignorance and stupidity coming from people that don't really understand what they're doing. Yeah.
Look, I get a lot of criticism from comedians on the left who say to me, I can't believe you had X, Y, and Z on the podcast. Classic example, Nigel Farage. I don't know if you know who Nigel Farage is, but if you, for your listeners who may be based in Canada, may not be aware of him, Nigel Farage was one of the politicians who was instrumental in the UK leaving the European Union. He was instrumental in the Brexit process. He was the first person really who took that mantle on, made it happen. And he said some things that weren't, very nice or whatever else, and it could be construed as bigoted, etc. And we had him on, and we talked about it, and we talked about Brexit, and we talked about a variety of other things. And I had people telling me, like, I can't believe that you had him on, as if to say that because I have him on, I now support him, and I support and espouse his views. It's utterly ridiculous. The whole purpose of trigonometry is that we talk to people from across the political spectrum. We've had Jordan Peterson on, right? And I actually agree with quite a lot of what Jordan says. But after Jordan Peterson, we then had the co-founder of Extinction Rebellion. And then I got people on the right going to me, I can't believe that you support Extinction Rebellion.
I was going to ask you about that because, when you mentioned Nigel Farage, because I know you guys had them on. But like, I was going to ask you if you got pushback from the right on that, because, okay, I think Extinction Rebellion is a bunch of loons, but bring them on, question them, ask them why they're doing it. And, you might find some kernel of truth or something in there that's interesting. It's like, okay, you know what? You make a good point here, but you're going way off tangent. Might be better this way. Like the whole process of, the dialectic where you discuss ideas back and forth to come at a truth. I mean, I'm not Extinction Rebellion, but climate change is a problem. Yeah, like, it's something that has to be dealt with. The solutions that come out might not be the greatest, but at least if we start from that premise, okay, you know what, you guys say this, I agree with you there. Let's start. I mean, I see the more polarization I see. The best explanation I saw of this was, and now here's another person who's, out of favor with a lot of people, James Lindsay. He was on Joe Rogan's show this was a couple of years ago. And I think he was on when he was on with Peter Boghossian, and he talked about a centrifuge in chemistry. So it takes it and it spins it and puts stuff out the outside. And that's what I see happening in society is they're spinning it and spinning it and spinning it. And you've got, the right going to one side, the left going to one side, and the center is not holding. And it's, so like, do you see that kind of stuff? Like, is it just, oh, you've had them on, so you must agree with them, or we can never agree with anything that person says, so we don't even have to have a discourse? But like, how are people expecting to solve problems? Like, again, like climate change, it's
the problem is like you said, the center. The reality is the vast majority of us are in the center. We may be center left, we may be center right, we may be slap bang in the center. The problem with being in the center is it means you get flack from both sides. Like with me, I get criticized by the left, really, and saying some pretty nasty things, but I also get criticized by people on the right. It is difficult to be in the center because immediately what you do when you're in the center is you look at both tribes and say to them, I do not want to be part of your tribe. And immediately when you say that to people, people get very upset because they interpret that as a rejection. And also when you're we as human beings, we crave, we have a deep craving to be part of a tribe. That is hardwired into us. So to then look at a particular tribe and leave or get expelled from that tribe is incredibly painful. Incredibly painful. So the most difficult thing to be is in the center. It's to look at the left and say, I like these ideas. Socialized medicine, great. Everybody should have an education. The state should pay for it, great. Are these other ideas? No, not for me. Thank you very much. Right? The right, yes, I like this aspect of it. I like that aspect of it. But this part I can't get on board with. You're effectively making yourself an outsider. And once you do that, you're making your life more difficult. And also as well, you're going against your own biology, which is hardwired to make you want to be part of a tribe. That's why it's so difficult to be in the center, because you're on your own and you're standing apart. And that's tough. It's not easy.
Yeah. And the center thing, like, okay, I've been saying this for a few years. I mean, I use the terms left, right, liberal, conservative, because we don't have anything else. We just don't have the language, but the terms mean nothing. Like left in the US, left in Canada, and left in the UK are three different things.
Yeah.
I think the left in Canada is closer to the left in the UK than it is the US. Because I mean, our conservative party would be center left in the United States, like the conservative party.
Of course,
And so like when you say center, it's like, I was joking around with people. I'm like, you know what? I'm not liberal. I'm not conservative, whatever. I'm an enlightenmentarian. I like the values of the Enlightenment, and that's what I want. So I think it's more of a principled stance. Like you're not just going along with, oh, I'm left, I have to vote for, Corbyn or Trudeau or Biden or whatever. Like, I have to vote for these people because I'm left. It's like being centrist or whatever. I think, like I said, it's more principled stance. Like the last election in Canada, the choices we had were awful, and we're more like the UK, where you don't, we're not like the States where we vote for the prime minister. We vote for the member of parliament in our riding, and then the party with the most seats chooses the prime minister. But like none of the leaders were good in my riding. None of the candidates, except for the Liberal candidate, you didn't hear from any of the other ones. You didn't know what they were about. I'm like, you know what? Not one of these people deserves my vote. My vote is important to me. It's a valuable thing. And I'm not just going to give it to someone because, oh, you know what? I'm left. I got to vote for the Liberals. My dad always voted for the Liberals. I'm going to vote for the Liberals. Like I think it's become like that. Like like a lot of the people on the extremes, and I don't even want to say, like, let's say 3/4 of the way to the far end of either spectrum, they're doing it more out of loyalty to their party or their side than they are out of principle.
Yeah. They do it because I identify it as being left. Therefore, they're presented with a candidate who says I'm on the left. Therefore, they vote for them. It's like, all these people who were, overjoyed that, Biden got elected. And let's accept that Trump is deeply divisive. He's a very strong flavor. I'm not a Trump supporter. I think that, in many ways, his attitude and his demeanor created a hell of an amount of damage in the United States and entrenched attitudes and relations and, and all of this, right? But people were seeing the election of Biden and Kamala Harris as being this universal positive. The adults are back in the room. And I'm like, have you actually read up about Biden and Harris if you believe that? And the reality is people don't, because people And I understand why. Again, people just want to belong. They want to have a tribe. They want to have people who accept them. They want to be protected. They want to feel part of something. The moment you start questioning, the moment you start saying, well, I disagree with that, and I don't really like that, is the moment you begin to alienate from yourself from the tribe. And the moment you start to alienate yourself, you get one step closer to being expelled. And then when you do get expelled, it is incredibly painful.
Like when you said the adults, are back in the room with the Biden thing, I just thought of one thing, which was Steven Pinker and his wife doing that little happy dance when they announced Biden winning. And I'm like, okay, you're supposed to be the serious academic or whatever. Okay, be happy. I don't care. You're a candidate one. But I'm like, that's what you've reduced yourself to? Like, that's all I'm going to think of Steven Pinker from now on, is that stupid little happy dance he did, which is a shame. Because, I mean, I like what Pinker has to say. Like, I've got his books. I think he's, highly intelligent person, but like, I don't know if it's a lack of religion. I don't know if it's a lack of something, but like, I think Douglas Murray had said it, like, you don't need to identify with your political party or a candidate that much. Like, whether Corbyn or Johnson got elected in the last UK election, or like, here, if it was Trudeau or that time it was Scheer or whatever, your life shouldn't, obviously things are going to change, but I mean, you shouldn't be in bed crying for 2 weeks because your candidate lost. Like I don't know. I just see people latching on to anything to give their life some sort of meaning. It's like they're looking for something to give them meaning, and it's, oh, well, I'll do politics or something. I don't know. It's like I said, it's really bizarre.
Yeah. I mean, again, it's because we live in a society. If you look at our cities, we increasingly live more and more solitary lives. Our families are shrinking. There is no more religion anymore. Well, for most people, they live in a secular society. They feel alone. They feel empty. They feel rootless. And what is a really good way to feel part of a community, to feel a bond? Partly it's politics, especially when it starts to get wrapped up with morality, where you go, well, I think this and I vote this because I'm a good person. And then once that starts to happen, then what you have is real tribalism, and it starts getting dangerous, because once that starts to happen, then you start to lose and start to fail to see the humanity in other people, in the people who oppose you. And that's worrying, because once you lose the humanity in other people and you start dehumanizing them, then you can become capable of anything.
I want to go back to something you'd said, like people calling you right wing. Oh, you said that you're right wing. Now, again, like I said, I got into all this because I became vocal about Islam.
Yeah.
When I left to go overseas, there was no social media. Like, it was in 2002. So, and that was ubiquitous, but it wasn't what it is now. And, so I wasn't a vocal person. Like, I was an IT geek. I set up communication systems. Like, I was like, that's all I did. Like, I didn't speak out. But then I came back and I started hearing like all this bullshit about Islam. And then as soon as apostates in Islam, obviously, death threats. There's 13 countries that will kill you. You have, like, I guess most famously or whatever in the Netherlands, Theo van Gogh got stabbed and there was a note left for Anders Elliot, like things like that. Like, so as soon as I came out, as soon as I came back and I started speaking more vocally and more publicly on social media and stuff, it was the right-wing talking point. Oh, you're using a right-wing talking point. You're going to push the right wing. And it went from right-wing to you're racist, then you're fascist, then you're a Nazi, then you're literally Hitler. Like I saw that progression go along, and it's like, but aren't they seeing like the Islam talk? They seated a lot to the right. There were people, and I'm not talking about Richard Spencer from the alt-right. Like there's a guy, Robert Spencer from Jihad Watch. I think in Ireland there was Anne-Marie Waters, and you had Daniel Pipes. And these are not people I particularly like, but they made some points. and they actually spent the time to read the Quran, read the Hadith, and look into what it was. So they would make a complaint, and then they would start off with, okay, I'm like, yeah, what he's saying is true, but then they would just go way off the rails because everyone on the left ceded that ground. I see the same thing happening here with like wokeism or whatever you want to call it, like, you know, the crazy social justice stuff, where most of the people I learned this from, like people like Helen Pluckrose or, you know, Peter Boghossian or John Hay, they're left wing. You know, James Lindsay, even, like, you know, I know James voted for Trump, but James is ideally an Enlightenment liberal as far as I can see. But, you know, there's an article in the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, attacks on wokeism is coming from the right, or attack on the woke is, you know, a right wing thing. And like, you're again ceding the ground. Like I could see a right wing person, let's say someone like Richard Spencer, the alt right guy. I could see him reading critical race theory and going to his followers who are obviously not going to read this stuff, and he can totally misrepresent. And he doesn't have to do much. See, like, they hate white people. They think you're evil. And I mean, a lot of critical race theory says that. And like, that's like with the Islam thing and with this, I said, you're going to get an overcorrection. You're going to get a huge overcorrection coming. I hate the direction that, you know, the left is going into, and I think that that's awful, but I'm terrified of an overcorrection from the right. Like, you know, like far right, nationalistic, jingoistic stuff. Like, I think the way I look at it is, if we compare World War II to communism, like the Nazis, you know, the Blitzkrieg was really fast, took over, did everything, killed whatever they killed in, you know, like whatever, 12, 15 million people in that short amount of time. Communism was a long game, 100 million people over 70 years. So it's the right, I think, would be a faster, more brutal attack right away, as opposed to a long-term. And I don't want either, but I'm always worried about that overcorrection from the right, and like this continuously just dumping people on that. Oh, you're right wing, you're right wing, you're right wing, when they're not, and you're going to turn them that way.
I think also the problem is look, we use the term right wing, and then we don't actually mean right wing. When I hear the term right wing, what I mean is somebody who is probably, a free market, a libertarian. That's what I actually think is right wing. Small government, tiny government, no intervention. Let the markets decide. Now, I think that's the wrong way to go about things, but I think it's a valid viewpoint. We need to be clear what we mean when we use the term right wing, because, and it's not you, it's all of us. Yeah. What does it actually mean? What does it mean? Do you does that just mean what? That you're a Christian conservative? Does it mean that you're a right wing libertarian, or does it mean racist and white supremacist? Because actually, those two things are completely different. So firstly, I think what we need to do is reclaim the term right wing. It is a valid political position, just as being left wing is a valid political position. Yeah. I'm not either of those two things, but I think those two things should exist. So we need to make that clarification first of all. And then the problem that you're really dealing with what you're really talking about, I think, again, comes down to the shrinking of the Overton window, discussing and being able to discuss certain topics. So we talk about extremist Islam, for example. In my country, we had the grooming gang scandal. I don't know if you've heard of this.
Yeah.
Right. So for your listeners who haven't heard of it, I don't know. There was groups of first, second generation, mainly Islamic, Pakistani, Bangladeshi. I think also maybe Afghan, but that third one I'm not too sure about. Men who groomed particularly white working class women and then had sex with them, raped them, and a lot of these girls were underage. And this was never spoken about because it was deemed to be, racist, unacceptable, blah, blah, blah. And so it was covered up. And it was a scandal, and it's been happening for over 20 years. We have someone on our show to talk about it, who was herself a victim of the grooming gangs. She said that around 500,000 girls, some boys, but mainly girls, had been victim of these gangs. since the 90s, 500,000.
Um,
And it was covered up.
like
Now,
just
the problem...
sorry, I just wanted to say like on that, I think it's like, because I looked into it and I've spoken to someone from the grooming gangs, and I mean, like I've, you know, it's been going on since the 80s. And when you said generationally, it was a cottage industry for some families. Like it was, you know, multi-generation. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you on that.
No, it's fine, Abaid. But what happened was, because of the shrinking of the Overton window, it was said that we can't talk about this. The police didn't want to prosecute these people.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody wanted to talk about it. It was forced underground. What happens when an issue gets forced underground is you have someone very, very intelligent on the far right who will look at it and think to themselves, I can exploit this. So they will go to the people who are afflicted by this, who have been ignored by society as a whole, and said, they don't care about you. I do. I'll represent you. And that's what happens. And that's how these people get power, they get currency, and they become relevant. And it's not just the grooming gangs, it can be whatever it may be. But that is how they become powerful, because ordinary people feel that their plights and their issues are being ignored. It's not going to go away. Okay. It's going to manifest, and it's going to mutate into something far darker and uglier, which is what happened in that particular instance.
Okay, like again with the grooming gangs, it was horrible. But I mean, I'll give you another example of something like this. And this was, I worked in Afghanistan for close to 7 years, and I was setting up communication systems for NATO. I was managing their IT. And you hear things when you're there.
Yeah.
So in 2007, it was a British general at the time. When I first got there, I first got there in 2004. And I worked off and on over, like I did 7 years over 10 years, like over a 10-year period. I was there for 7 years, like off and on. The Taliban and Al-Qaeda and the insurgency was located in the north and in the east, like mainly the northeast. By about 2007, they had quelled a lot of that, and they were starting to move down south. So NATO made an agreement with farmers saying, burn your poppy fields. It was too late in that season for them to grow anything else. We'll feed you. We'll take care of your families over the winter. And next year we'll give you seeds and you can plant other crops.
Yeah.
So these guys were growing poppies because, they want to feed their family.
Of course.
These are small little farmers in little villages. So they burnt their crops. The money never came. The food never came. Now, this got people pissed off. The Taliban, the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and other insurgents, because a lot of the insurgents were old warlords and drug lords. It was not just one cohesive thing. They would come up, say, you got a little bit of a farm. Let my people hide here or whatever. We'll feed you.
Yeah.
Guy wants to feed his family. And then you had the stronghold of the Taliban and Al-Qaeda take up in the south. Like Camp Bastion, when it was first built, it was a British camp. It was this tiny little thing. Then when Harry went there, I mean, it turned into something like 30,000 troops. And that was because everything blew up in the south and they had to have a bigger presence down there.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing here. Like I'm obviously, like what I'm saying here was an extreme, but it's the same thing I'm seeing here. It's like people being pushed. When I say right wing, I should have said far right, you're being put, but people are being pushed to that where they might have been, they might have been good with Obama, but they saw their jobs go. They saw everything else go. Yeah. They were called white supremacists. They were told they had privilege, even though they didn't have work or anything like that. Trump comes along and says, I'll bring back jobs. I'll bring back the coal mines, whatever. You can say that was all bull. Like, I'm not a Trump supporter. I'm not, I wouldn't have voted for him, but he gave them something. It was that exact same thing. And I mean, like, that's what I say, you're going to have that overcorrection. I mean, like Charlottesville should have been a wake-up call. Like they're, I blame those people for what they did, but if you try to understand why they did it, it wasn't just because they were all racist assholes to begin with. They might have been pushed that way. Okay, the year or 2 years before Charlottesville, there was a few schools in New York City that separated kids, and this is kids as young as the third grade, so you're 8, 9 years old. They separated them by race, and these are all elite schools. They separated kids by race 45 minutes a week and told all the non-white kids that they have been oppressed their whole lives and that the white people oppressed them. And then they celebrated things that came out of their racial categories. They told the white kids, you're oppressors. You've done nothing but oppress. Your race has done this, and this bad. Within about a couple of months, the white kids started spouting off white supremacist rhetoric. Now, I'm not saying any of those people in Charlottesville went to these schools, but again, someone like a Richard Spencer could take that and rally up people. See, you lost your job. They're telling you you're privileged. The coal mine closed down, whatever. They hate you. And that's where, that's what I'm kind of, like I said, I really worry about that. And it's, it is far right. It is whatever, just extreme on either end is nuts. But that's what I'm afraid of. Like, you're pushing people from a sensible center position or center right position or whatever. And then you're pushing them to this thing because you're telling them you don't want them. You're telling them we don't want white people. Coca-Cola and their HR thing. I don't know if you saw that. It was a screenshot that came out. Be less white. Like, what the hell is that supposed to mean?
The moment when you start demonizing any group of people, any group, black, white, Asian, Latino, whatever it may be, there is going to be a reaction to that. It just is. And it's also, as well, the majority of people will just shrug their shoulders and get on with it, or moan about it, or complain, or get angry. But then there's always a very, very small group of people who will take matters into their own hands, and things will take a darker turn. And also, you will get the more nefarious elements of our society looking at that and thinking how they can exploit it for their own ends. That is what always happens. You saw that with the grooming gangs in this country. You saw that, I don't blame anyone who voted for Trump. I really, really don't. I don't blame anybody who felt disillusioned, let down, angry at the political system. They had every right to be. They were screwed over for generations. Thanks to globalization, their way of life disappeared. Their factories, their means of earning work. And the thing that people never acknowledge as well is that work brings dignity. It's not just a way for you to feed and clothe yourself. It also brings dignity and a sense of identity. And what happens with those communities is they lost their sense of dignity. And then they had a guy come in going, I'm going to bring these jobs back. I'm going to make America great again. Of course they voted for him. And liberals have just as much, if not more, to blame for that situation than anyone else.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to get into the whole Trump thing, but that's one of the things that really bugs me about this right now is after his election, a lot of the people who said, you know what, the excesses of the far left led to Trump, spent the next 4 years complaining about the shiny orange menace instead of actually fixing their, like the Jordan Peterson thing, clean your room, fix your own side. You admitted that caused this, but then you spent 4 years just reeling about Trump. And it's just, like I said, I don't want to belabor that too much. Look, I know you probably got stuff to do and I don't want to keep you too long, but if you got any last words about comedy or anything like that,
it's been a very funny podcast, hasn't it?
It's been kind of serious talking about comedy.
who were expecting jokes, sadly mistaken. What would I say about comedy, about everything? I'd just say that I think where we are now, I'll be honest with you, I think the world needs comedy more than ever, particularly where we are now. I don't think this, COVID situation is, I think those people who think that with, the vaccines and, it's one of the few things this government has managed to do well is the vaccine rollout. Mm-hmm. And there seems to be this attitude in the UK that we've kind of seen the end of COVID and we're on the way out. I don't think that in any shape or form. I think now we need comedy more than ever. I think comedy is a coping strategy. It's a way for us to deal and to talk about things that are difficult to talk about, difficult for us to face, whatever it may be. And I think it's a thing that, it helps us to connect with other people. Because if you can laugh with someone, you can find a common ground. And that's why I think it's so important that we don't, attack people for making jokes. We don't, try and deplatform comedians. We don't, even if we find a joke offensive, we don't support others losing their ability to connect on social media, in clubs, or wherever it may be. Because once you do that, you're essentially stopping what you're doing is you're preventing others from connecting with each other. And I just think it's really important. I think in a world where we're more atomized than ever before, it's really, really important to be able to connect, to be able to listen. And even if you find something offensive, have the humility to be able to look inside yourself and go, why do I find that offensive? Why do I disagree with that? Because actually, maybe you've got a blind spot that needs to be challenged, and you didn't like it that it was pointed out by somebody who isn't like you or thinks differently to you. So I guess that's what my final thought would be.
Oh, that's great.
Again, not ending it on a joke either, but there we go.
Why not? Let's be consistent. Well, thank you very much, Francis, for coming on. It was great talking to you.
Yeah.
And thanks everyone for listening. I'll be back.